I remember the second hell understood it was no longer alone, because even a realm engineered for endless war knows how to recognize a greater predator, and that recognition arrived as silence, not peace, but instinctive stillness rolling through the foundries, like a held breath, furnaces dimming, screaming, metal sagging mid-forge, as if the entire dimension sensed it was being evaluated rather than invaded. I was there, not as a warrior, but as a witness bound to record what should not have been possible when the rupture opened above the Argent Towers. Not a portal torn open by force, but a wound in meaning itself, a place where purpose drained out of reality, and from that absence, he emerged without spectacle, without conquest, a tall figure in scorched white robes that should have disintegrated but did not, bare feet resting on molten stone that refused to mark him, his presence calm in a way that felt obscene here. Because calm had no survival value in hell, and yet the flames leaned toward him as if remembering something they had been before they were turned into tools. When his eyes lifted, I understood a deeper terror than death. The fear of being fully understood, because he did not look at hell with hatred or hunger, but with memory, and the demons hesitated their combat routines, stuttering logic loops, collapsing under a scrutiny they were never designed to endure. One of the hell priests whispered his name, not as a challenge but as confession, Lucifer, spoken like a truth that burned on the way out, and he inclined his head in acknowledgement, not claiming dominion, merely confirming identity, and that alone caused lesser demons to unravel, their forms collapsing as belief evaporated, because they had been sustained as much by myth as by fire. He walked through the processing fields where souls were refined into argent energy, and the machinery screamed in protest, not from overload but contradiction, because Lucifer disrupted nothing physically, only conceptually, introducing questions into systems that only understood obedience, and as he passed, the embedded screams went silent one by one, not freed, not destroyed, simply finished, as if someone had finally listened long enough that they no longer needed to cry. Some demons knelt, their devotion spasmodic and broken, others attacked blindly, claws and plasma tearing toward him, only to slow and stop inches from his skin, suspended not by force but by refusal, reality declining to allow those intentions to complete, and Lucifer sighed, a tired human sound, and said quietly, "This is what you made of it," not accusing, merely observing, and the words struck deeper than any weapon, because hell had always justified itself through inevitability, and here stood something older than that lie. The alarms spread outward through the infernal citadels, and I felt the ripple escape hell itself, racing through dimensions like a migraine through the skull of the universe, and I knew the Slayer would feel it to that engineered response to hell's excess, because Lucifer's arrival was not an invasion but a challenge to the logic that had created the Doomslayer in the first place. Somewhere in blood-soaked corridors, the Slayer slowed, just for a fraction of a second, grip tightening, rage brushing against something unfamiliar, recognition, the sense that the war might not be the only possible answer, and that terrified hell more than any weapon ever had. Because rage can be anticipated, fed, redirected, but introspection is fatal to systems built on repetition. Lucifer reached the central spire where the hell priests ruled from thrones of flesh and steel, and he stood before them without hostility, looking at each as if searching for salvage. And when he spoke, his voice carried not through amplification but attention. You confuse dominion with purpose, cruelty with depth, noise with meaning, and the priests shrieked defiance, invoking gods and compacts, proclaiming ownership of hell, and Lucifer listened patiently before replying. You were tenants arguing over furniture in a house built on a lie, and the spire fractured, not violently, but along faults that had always existed, because hell's true vulnerability was never force, it was exposure. When the Slayer arrived, carving through collapsing resistance, the collision was inevitable, not between good and evil, but between annihilation and understanding, and when their eyes met, hell contracted around that moment like a wound clenching shut. The Slayer attacked, because violence was the only language hell had ever rewarded, and the blow that would have shattered a titan stopped inches from Lucifer, not blocked, not deflected, simply finished without completion. And Lucifer looked at the Slayer not with fear or reverence, but with something worse, clarity. You are very good at ending symptoms, he said, and the words cut deeper than any blade, because they implied a cause. As hell destabilized, visions bled into reality, revealing the truth beneath the machinery. Hell was never meant to be an empire, but a containment, a place where contradictions were exiled so reality could continue functioning elsewhere, and abandoned, it optimized for output rather than purpose. Suffering becoming fuel, repetition becoming doctrine, and the Doomslayer revealed not as destiny but escalation. a feedback loop where hell's excess birthed its perfect counter, each justifying the other indefinitely. Lucifer knelt before the oldest sigil, tracing the mark of choice before consequence, and hell screamed in recognition, because it remembered what it had been before it became profitable. The observers arrived then, vast intelligences imposing conclusions rather than arguments, displeased not by cruelty but inefficiency, and I understood that hell's greatest sin was convenience. A place where higher orders had outsourced responsibility, and when Lucifer refused erasure when the Slayer hesitated, the universe itself panicked. The choice was presented without ceremony: kill him and preserve the lie, or allow hell to end and force accountability to propagate outward. The weapon felt heavier than ever, not because of mass, but because pulling the trigger would choose a future. The Slayer lowered his weapon, and the universe reacted violently. Probabilities collapsing, futures snapping, hell screaming as it was forced to conclude rather than expand. Regions imploding into nothingness while others calcified into silent monuments of pain. And Lucifer accepted the cost, anchoring the collapse with his own coherence, fracturing as hell died around him. "Do not make me into another myth," he said as reality tore them apart. And when the observers withdrew to recalculate, hell fell inward in a terrible quiet, fire dimming, screams cutting off not into silence but absence. When the Slayer was thrown clear into unfamiliar stars, armor cracked, mission parameters gone, hell sealed without scar or portal, only distortion, the universe did not celebrate, because this was not victory, but responsibility. Worlds destabilized without their convenient enemy, gods fell silent, weapons rusted unused, and somewhere children were born who would never know hell as anything more than metaphor. Lucifer faded at the edge of existence, coherence dissolving into structure, satisfied not because he won, but because something had finally ended. The Doomslayer removed his armor not as repentance, but acknowledgement, becoming not a solution, but a reminder. A scar that learned how to stop bleeding, and the final horror revealed itself. Hell had existed not because it was necessary, but because it was simpler, and simplicity had cost the universe more than any demon ever did.